The fluorescent lights of the community clubhouse conference room hummed with a flat, bureaucratic indifference. It was a sound Luke was coming to associate with a very specific kind of misery. He stood at the flimsy lectern, the wood veneer peeling at the corners, and placed the document on its slanted surface. He was calm. He was prepared. This, he had told himself all morning, was merely a procedural misunderstanding that could be rectified with clear evidence and polite discourse. Before him, seated at a long folding table, was the Architectural Control Committee of the Serenity Cove Homeowners Association. There were 3 of them, but only one mattered. Rebecca Walsh, the committee chair, watched him with an expression of strained patience, her lips a thin, ungenerous line. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a severe ponytail that seemed to tug at the corners of her eyes, giving her a look of perpetual disapproval. She tapped a perfectly manicured finger on a stack of papers before her, the official record of his transgressions. "Mr. Hayes," she began, her voice crisp and devoid of warmth. "You have 5 minutes to present your appeal regarding the continued violation of CC&R Section 8.4.2. Please be concise." Luke nodded, taking a steadying breath. "Thank you. Madam Chair, members of the committee, I believe this is all a simple mistake stemming from a misinterpretation of the property lines. To clarify the matter, I've brought a copy of the original subdivision survey map, recorded with the county in 1978, when this lot was first created by my father." He carefully unrolled the document. It was a brittle, sepia-toned blueprint, the lines drawn with an architect's precision. He had protected it in a clear acetate sleeve. Using a pen as a pointer, he indicated a thick, unambiguous line bordering his property. As you can see, the dock, the path leading to it, and the small garden area are all well within the boundaries of my private lot. Number 27, the view corridor easement cited in the violation notice, appears to pertain to the common area adjacent to my property, not the property itself. He looked up, expecting a flicker of comprehension, perhaps even an apology. Instead, Rebecca squinted at the map as if it were a distasteful insect. "And who is the purveyor of this document?" she asked, her tone suggesting she was cross-examining a hostile witness. "I'm sorry." "The vendor," she clarified, her voice dripping with condescension. "Who is the county-approved vendor that produced this map for you?" Luke felt a prickle of confusion. "This isn't from a vendor. This is the original plat map, from my father's files. It's an official record, filed with the county recorder's office. The surveyor's seal is right here." Rebecca gave a small, dismissive shake of her head. She did not even glance at the seal. "I'm afraid the committee cannot accept documents that are not produced by a currently licensed and board-approved surveyor. It's a matter of procedural integrity. We have no way of verifying the authenticity of family heirlooms." The other 2 committee members, a nervous-looking man who seemed fused to his chair and a woman examining her cuticles, shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. The air in Luke's lungs seemed to solidify. "But it's a public record. You can look it up. The parcel number is on the violation notice you sent me." "We are not a title research company, Mr. Hayes," Rebecca said, her voice acquiring a hard, final edge. "We operate based on the association's governing documents and the reports from our designated compliance officers. This document is inadmissible." She made a small flicking gesture with her fingers, a silent command for him to remove the offending artifact. He stood there, frozen, the heavy acetate sleeve feeling suddenly ridiculous in his hands. The meticulous logic of his argument, the clear, irrefutable lines on the map, had just dissolved against a wall of pure, procedural malice. He had walked in, believing in reason. He was being shown the door by raw, arbitrary power. Therefore, Rebecca continued, a note of triumph in her voice as she picked up a gavel that seemed absurdly large for the small table. As you have presented no valid evidence to counter the violation notice, the committee's original finding stands. The fine is upheld. You have 30 days to bring the property into compliance. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel cracked against the table. The sound echoed in the silent, humming room. Luke felt the hot flush of blood creep up his neck. He had been publicly, politely, and utterly humiliated. As he rolled up the map his father had so carefully preserved, he met Rebecca's gaze. There was nothing personal in it, no anger, no glee, just the cold, placid satisfaction of a system functioning exactly as she intended. The cabin smelled of pine sap, old books, and the faint, mineral scent of the lake. It was the smell of Luke's childhood, a potent antidote to the sterile, recycled air of the corporate office where he had spent the last decade burning himself down to a nub. The doctor had called it occupational burnout. His sister, Sarah, had called it letting the soul-sucking vampires win. Luke just called it being tired. A deep, cellular exhaustion that no amount of sleep could fix. He'd inherited the cabin 6 months ago, after his father's heart had finally given out. It sat on a small, wooded lot that sloped gently down to the shore of Serenity Cove, a place that had lived up to its name for the 40 years his family had owned it. The plan was simple: spend the summer here, disconnected, fixing the leaky roof, fishing from the dock his dad had built, and trying to remember what it felt like to not have a quarterly earnings report hanging over his head. On a video call, Sarah's face was a pixelated mask of sisterly concern. "Are you sure about this? Luke, just disappearing for 3 months. What about your team?" "My team will survive," he said, panning his phone's camera across the dusty, sun-drenched living room. "They're probably thrilled to have my micromanaging carcass out of the office. Besides, I need this." "I know you do," she conceded. Sarah was a pragmatic lawyer, a dealer in contracts and liabilities, but she understood the sentimental value of the cabin. Just be careful. Dad always said that HOA next door was getting pushy. "It'll be fine," he'd said, full of the easy confidence of someone who had not yet met Rebecca Walsh. "What are they going to do? Fine me for having a nostalgic amount of dust?" He spent the first week in a blissful state of manual labor. He replaced warped porch boards, cleared winter debris from the gutters, and sorted through his father's workshop. In the old roll-top desk in the study, he found a treasure trove of paternal fastidiousness. Tucked into a heavy binder was a copy of the Serenity Cove Homeowners Association covenants, conditions, and restrictions. His father, a man who believed in knowing the enemy, had highlighted several passages. Luke's eyes skimmed over them, his brain still refusing to engage with dense legalese. He did notice one highlighted sentence under a section about easements. Farger 8.4.2, Association reserves the right to maintain easements for community benefit. It seemed innocuous. He closed the binder. Beneath it, rolled into a tight cylinder and secured with a brittle rubber band, was the old plat map. He'd smiled, remembering his dad spreading it out on the kitchen table to explain property lines to a 6-year-old Luke. He set it aside, a relic for another day. The piece was first disturbed not by a person, but by a piece of paper. It was a simple courtesy notice, unsigned, tucked into the handle of his screen door. A friendly reminder from the Serenity Cove HOA. It read in a cheerful, condescending font. Per CCNR, HOA 8.4.2, the designated view corridor along the lakeshore must be kept clear of obstructions to ensure aesthetic harmony and preserve community sightlines. Please remove the unapproved personal items tool chest and trim the overgrown native plantings on the dock path. We appreciate your cooperation in keeping Serenity Cove beautiful. Luke read it twice, then walked down to the path. His dad's old, weathered toolbox sat on the first step of the dock, exactly where it had sat for 20 years. The overgrown native plantings were ferns and wild geraniums that had been there since the last ice age. The path was on his property. The dock was his property. He crumpled the notice and tossed it in the trash. It was probably just an automated letter sent by some overzealous management company. He forgot about it. A week later, the certified mail arrived. The green and white sticker on the envelope felt vaguely threatening. Inside was a formal violation notice. Date June 12th. RE violation of CCNR. Figure 8.4.2. View corridor, maintenance property lot. 27. Dear homeowner, this letter serves as a formal notice of a continuing violation of the association's governing documents. On June 5th, a courtesy notice was issued regarding obstructions within the 5-foot view corridor easement. As of the inspection dated June 11th, the violation has not been cured. The obstructions, specifically a metal tool chest and untrimmed vegetation, remain. Pursuant to the association's fine schedule, a fine of $25 has been assessed to your account. This fine will continue at a rate of $10 per day until the violation is resolved. Included was a grainy, zoomed-in photograph of his father's toolbox, looking like evidence from a crime scene. The letter was signed by the property management company, but at the bottom, a line read, "Issued by the authority of the Architectural Control Committee." The threat was no longer anonymous or friendly. It was official, it was documented, and it was costing him money. Luke's first instinct was to call and unleash a torrent of logical, indignant fury. But the burned-out project manager in him took over. Follow the process. Create a paper trail. He drafted a polite, firm email to the property management company, attaching a screenshot of the county's public parcel map showing his property lines. To whom it may concern, he wrote, I believe there has been a mistake. The area cited in the violation is part of my private property, not a common area easement. Please see the attached county map for clarification. I respectfully request that the violation be removed and the fine rescinded. He hit send and tracked the certified letter he sent with a physical copy, feeling a small sense of accomplishment. The system, however flawed, would surely correct itself in the face of such clear evidence. The response came not from the management company, but from an email address he didn't recognize, or Walsh, ACC, Cherio, Serenity, Cove HOA, org. Mr. Hayes, your email has been forwarded to me. The County Parcel Viewer is a general-purpose tool and does not supersede the association's recorded easement deeds. Section 8.4.2 grants the association aesthetic control over the view corridor for the benefit of the entire community. The violation stands. If you wish to dispute this further, you may request a formal hearing with the ACC. Regards, Rebecca Walsh, Chair, Architectural Control Committee. The email was a masterpiece of bureaucratic stonewalling. It acknowledged nothing, conceded nothing, and offered only one path forward, a formal process she controlled. It was then that Luke realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. The system wasn't broken. It was being wielded. And as he typed back his request for a hearing, he understood that he was walking into a fight he hadn't asked for, against an opponent who made the rules. That night, he pulled out his father's heavy binder of CC&Rs and began to read, not with casual interest, but with the focused intensity of a man preparing for battle. The highlighted sentence association reserves the right to maintain easements for community benefit no longer seemed so innocuous. She's misinterpreting the plain language of the deed, Sarah said, her lawyer face grim on his laptop screen. A maintenance easement is for access mowing, trimming, maybe fixing a seawall. It doesn't grant aesthetic control. That's a massive overreach. That's what I told her. She doesn't care, Luke said, pacing his small kitchen. She just keeps citing the CC&Rs like they're holy scripture. Okay, deep breaths. Little brother, Sarah advised. Don't get emotional. This is a document fight. What you need is the original easement deed filed with the county. It will define the exact purpose and scope of the easement. The CC&Rs can't grant the HOA more power than the deed allows. The advice was sound, a clear, actionable strategy. It gave Luke a sense of purpose beyond simmering resentment. He thanked his sister and hung up, feeling a renewed flicker of the methodical problem solver he used to be. The next morning, he decided to take a walk and clear his head before planning his trip to the county seat. As he rounded the bend in the shoreline path, he saw a man wrestling with a tripod and a theodolite near the property marker that separated his lot from his next-door neighbor's. The man was older, with a sun-weathered face, a halo of white hair, and a look of intense concentration. "Morning," Luke said. The man grunted, not looking up from his eyepiece. "If you're from the HOA, I've already told you my fence is 6 inches inside the line, and I have the rebar to prove it." "I'm not from the HOA," Luke said with a short laugh. "Quite the opposite. I'm Luke Hayes. My dad was Bill." The man finally looked up, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Bill Hayes's boy. I'll be damned. David Miller. I live 2 doors down. Knew your dad for 30 years. Sorry for your loss. He was a good man. Stood his ground." "Thanks, David." He sure did. Luke hesitated, then decided to take a chance. "You're a surveyor." "Retired," David corrected. "Can't shake the habit. Every time that woman sends out a violation notice, I come out here and triple-check my own lines. It's a compulsion." "That woman being Rebecca Walsh." David snorted. "Who else, Queen Rebecca? Thinks she's the sole arbiter of taste, property law, and the proper shade of beige for mailbox posts." He straightened up, wiping his hands on his canvas trousers. "What's she got you for?" Luke explained the situation, the view corridor, the toolbox, the misinterpretation of the easement. David listened, nodding slowly, a familiar story playing out with a new victim. "Aesthetic control on a maintenance easement," he mused. "That's a new one. Bold. Even for her. You're going to need more than the county website to fight that." "My sister, she's a lawyer, said I need the original easement deed." A slow grin spread across David's face. A trip to the county recorder's office. My favorite place on earth. It's a dusty, glorious treasure hunt. He looked Luke up and down. "You look like you could use a guide. I'm free tomorrow. Pick me up at 8. We'll go dig up some truth." The county recorder's office was a temple of bureaucracy, filled with the scent of old paper and the quiet rustle of clerks fetching enormous, leather-bound plat books. David moved through it with the confidence of a regular, greeting the clerks by name and navigating the arcane filing system with an expert's touch. For hours, they hunched over a brightly lit table, poring over deeds, minutes, and subdivision plans. They found the original deed for the Serenity Cove development. As Sarah had predicted, it clearly defined the 5-foot easement along the shoreline as a utility and maintenance easement. Its stated purpose was for access to install, maintain, and repair community-owned utilities, and for the general upkeep of the shoreline common area. There was no mention of views, aesthetics, or sightlines. "There it is," Luke said, a wave of vindication washing over him. It's exactly what we thought. Hold on, David said, his finger tracing a line on another document. This is where it gets interesting. He had pulled the HOA's incorporation documents and the minutes from the board meetings for the past 5 years, all public records. Look at this, he said, pointing to the minutes from a meeting 3 years ago. Motion to approve contract with Lakeside Landscaping for view corridor maintenance and enforcement. Approved. He then cross-referenced it with another public database. Lakeside Landscaping. Registered agent Todd Peterson. Same address as Rebecca Walsh's sister. It's her brother-in-law's company. Luke stared at the documents. So, she's using this made-up rule to funnel HOA money to her family. Looks that way, David said grimly. And look at the minutes for that vote. 3 of the 5 board members were absent. The motion passed 2-0 at a special meeting called with only 48 hours' notice. It's all technically legal according to the bylaws, but it stinks to high heaven. They found more. When Luke had formally requested copies of the board minutes from the management company, the section detailing the landscaping contract had been redacted, blacked out with a thick marker. But here, in the official county record, it was all in plain sight. It was a classic small potatoes corruption scheme, a manufactured rule, a conflict of interest contract, and a system of control designed to silence anyone who questioned it. But for Luke, the smoking gun wasn't in the county's dusty books. It was waiting for him back at the cabin, rolled up in his father's desk. That evening, he and David carefully unrolled the vintage plat map on the kitchen table. David put on a pair of reading glasses and leaned in close, examining the fine print and the surveyor's notes in the margins. Luke pointed out the area in question. "This is the view corridor she's talking about," he said. David was silent for a long moment, tracing the faint blue lines with a calloused finger. Then he let out a low whistle. "Oh, she's not just misinterpreting the rule. Son, she's lying." He tapped a specific point on the map. "Look here. The easement isn't just for general utility and maintenance. The original survey specifies its purpose. See that notation, UESWL. What does that mean?" David looked up, a glint of righteous fury in his eyes. Utility easement for submerged water line. Your dad granted the community access across this strip of his land for one reason, so they could run a pipe out to their central irrigation pump in the cove. It has nothing to do with views or landscaping. It's for a specific, buried water pipe. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening thud. Rebecca wasn't just overreaching. She wasn't just engaging in petty cronyism. She was committing deliberate, calculated fraud. She had taken a specific, limited-use utility easement and twisted it into a blanket grant of aesthetic control to enrich her family and assert her dominance over the neighborhood. The toolbox on the steps, the ferns on the path, they were just the pretext. His property was the test case. Luke felt a cold wave of anger, followed by a surge of pure, unadulterated resolve. This was no longer about a $25 fine. This wasn't even about his father's toolbox. This was about a fundamental truth. He had moved here to find peace, but he was starting to realize that sometimes peace had to be fought for. He was no longer on defense. He was on the attack. The thick envelope arrived 2 weeks before the annual meeting. It came from a law firm in the city, the kind with a 3-word name and an address on the top floor of a glass tower. The letterhead was heavy, expensive paper designed to intimidate. Re-notice of intent to place lion. The language was cold, brutal, and effective. Luke's unpaid fines, now totaling $215 after daily penalties, had been turned over for collection. The HOA was now also charging him for their legal fees, which had somehow already reached $750, the new total. $965 was due within 30 days. If it was not paid, the association would place a lien on his property, an action that could, eventually, lead to foreclosure. The letter was a declaration of war. Rebecca, feeling the pressure from his persistent questions and document requests, had escalated from the bureaucratic battlefield to the legal one. The lien was the HOA's nuclear option, and she had just pushed the button. He was on the phone with Sarah, discussing his options, paying under protest, filing a lawsuit when he saw the little golf cart pull up in front of Mrs. Gable's house across the street. It was the HOA's compliance officer. He watched as the man stuck a violation notice to the elderly widow's door. Luke felt a knot of dread in his stomach. A few minutes later, his phone rang. It was Mrs. Gable, her voice trembling. "Luke, dear, I'm so sorry to bother you. It's just, the HOA has fined me for my wind chimes. They said they violate the noise ordinance." Luke's blood ran cold. Mrs. Gable had lived in that house for 50 years. Her husband, Frank, had hung those chimes on the porch the year before he passed away. Their gentle, metallic song was as much a part of the neighborhood's character as the cry of the loons on the lake. The noise ordinance had never been enforced for something so benign. "Don't worry, Mrs. Gable," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'll look into it. It's probably just a mistake." But he knew it wasn't a mistake. It was a message. The message was delivered in person the next afternoon. Rebecca Walsh appeared on his porch. Her demeanor entirely changed. The imperious committee chair was gone, replaced by someone projecting an aura of weary reasonableness. "Luke," she said, not waiting for an invitation to sit in one of his wicker chairs, "this has all gotten out of hand. Don't you think?" He remained standing, his arms crossed. "You're the one who sent the lawyer letters." "Rebecca." She sighed, a theatrical display of frustration. "I'm just trying to protect the community's assets. When members don't pay their fines, it affects everyone. Look, I'm not here to fight." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a confidential murmur. "I'm here to offer a solution. An olive branch." He waited. "I've seen your name on the list to speak at the annual meeting," she said. "You've been digging around in the county records. You're clearly passionate about this. But a public confrontation isn't going to solve anything. It will just create more division, more legal fees for everyone." "What's your point, Rebecca?" "My point," she said, her eyes locking onto his, "is that I have a certain amount of discretionary authority as board president. For the sake of neighborhood harmony, I'm willing to exercise it." She paused for effect. "Withdraw your request to speak at the meeting. Drop this whole challenge. In return, I will personally waive all your outstanding fines and legal fees. And," she added, her voice softening, "I'll see to it that Mrs. Gable's little violation is misplaced. A clerical error. She's a sweet woman on a fixed income. It would be a shame for her to be burdened by legal troubles over a sentimental keepsake." There it was, the moral test, laid bare on his sun-drenched porch. It was a brilliant, cruel move. She was offering him an easy way out of his own financial and legal jeopardy. But the price was his silence, and the collateral was a vulnerable old woman's peace of mind. Rebecca wasn't just targeting Mrs. Gable. She was using her as a pawn, a human shield to protect her corrupt enterprise. Luke looked past Rebecca, across the street to Mrs. Gable's house. He could see the wind chimes glinting in the afternoon sun. He thought of his father, a man who had feuded with neighbors over fallen trees and loud parties, but who had always, without fail, shoveled Mrs. Gable's driveway after every snowstorm. His choice was clear. It wasn't even a choice. My father's toolbox is going to stay right where it is, Luke said, his voice quiet but firm. I'll see you at the annual meeting. Rebecca's mask of reasonableness evaporated. The cold, hard lines of the committee chair returned to her face. You're making a mistake, Luke, she said, standing up. You're choosing to hurt an old woman, just to make a point. She turned and walked away, her back ramrod straight. The offer had been a test. And, by passing it, Luke had confirmed he was a threat she could not buy or intimidate. He knew, with absolute certainty, that her next move would be to try and destroy him. And he knew, with equal certainty, that he had to go through with it. His fight was no longer just for his property. It was for Mrs. Gable. It was for the principle that a community shouldn't be a place where the vulnerable were used as bargaining chips. The auditorium of the Serenity Cove Community Center was packed. Luke had seen smaller crowds at off-Broadway plays, homeowners, many of whom he'd only ever seen retrieving their mail, sat in rows of folding chairs, fanning themselves with copies of the meeting agenda. The air was thick with anticipation and the scent of stale coffee. At the front of the room, the 5-member board of directors sat at a long table. Looking out at the crowd with varying degrees of discomfort, Rebecca, as president, was in the center, a picture of calm authority. Beside her, a large digital clock was projected onto the screen on the wall, its red numerals already counting down the minutes allotted for the pre-meeting mingling. Luke took a seat near the back, his laptop bag resting at his feet. Inside was his entire case, condensed into a crisp, 5-minute PowerPoint presentation. David gave him a reassuring nod from across the aisle. Mrs. Gable offered a small, watery smile. Sarah had sent him a text message that morning. Just the facts. No emotion. You got this. The meeting began with the usual drone of procedural business approval of the previous year's minutes, the treasurer's report, committee updates. Luke listened, his heart pounding a steady, nervous rhythm against his ribs. Finally, the board president announced the next agenda item. We now move to the open forum for homeowner comments, Rebecca said, her voice smooth and professional. As a reminder, each speaker will be limited to 5 minutes to ensure everyone has a chance to be heard. The time will be displayed on the screen. We will begin with those who signed up in advance. First on the list is Luke Hayes, from Lot 27. A small murmur went through the crowd. Luke walked to the podium at the side of the stage, plugged his laptop into the projector, and took a deep breath. The digital clock on the screen reset to 5 hours and began to tick down in relentless 1-second increments. 4:59, 4:58. Good evening, everyone, he began, his voice steadier than he expected. He clicked to his first slide, which was simply a photo of Mrs. Gable's wind chimes. Before I begin my prepared remarks, he said, looking not at the board, but out at his neighbors, I feel it's important to address a matter of principle. Many of you know my neighbor, Mrs. Gable. She was recently fined for these wind chimes, which her late husband gave her. Last week, I was made a private offer. It was suggested that if I agreed to remain silent tonight, both my fines and Mrs. Gable's could be forgiven. He let the words hang in the air. He didn't mention Rebecca by name. He didn't have to. The temperature in the room dropped by 10 degrees. He saw board members exchange uneasy glances. I believe, he continued, his voice resonating with a conviction that surprised even him, that this community should not be a place where our most vulnerable neighbors are used as bargaining chips. A person's home should be a sanctuary, not a source of anxiety. That is the principle I'm here to defend tonight. He clicked the remote, 4:15, 4:14. The next slide showed a high-resolution image of Section 8.4.2 of the CC&Rs. The conflict over my property began with this clause, which grants the HOA the right to maintain easements for community benefit. Click. The next slide showed the official easement deed from the county recorder's office. However, the actual recorded deed defines this easement's purpose very specifically. It is a utility and maintenance easement, intended to provide access for upkeep. Click. The screen now displayed the brittle, sepia-toned plat map from his father's desk. He used the laser pointer to circle the surveyor's notation, and the original plat map is even more specific. It defines it as a utility easement for submerged water line. Not for views, not for aesthetics, for a pipe. 255, 254. A low buzz of conversation started to fill the room. People were leaning forward, pointing at the screen. So the question is, why would a rule about a water pipe be enforced as an aesthetic view corridor? Luke asked. Let's look at the record. Click. The next slide was a side-by-side comparison. On the left was the copy of the board minutes he had received from the management company, with the vendor contract information completely blacked out. On the right was the unredacted version he and David had retrieved from the public county archives. The name, Lakeside Landscaping, and the amount of the contract were clearly visible. The association hired Lakeside Landscaping to enforce this view corridor rule, Luke explained, his voice even and factual. Public records show that the owner of this company is the board president's brother-in-law. 120, 119. The buzz in the room grew louder. A man in the front row shouted, "Is that true? Rebecca." Rebecca sat rigid, her face a pale, furious mask. She opened her mouth to speak, but the board's lawyer put a hand on her arm and shook his head. Luke knew he was running out of time. He had one last point to make. "This isn't about one toolbox or one set of wind chimes," he said, his voice rising slightly. "It's about due process. It's about transparency. It's about a system of governance that has been used not for community benefit, but for personal power and financial gain. Our HOA fees, your money, are being used to pay a board member's relative to enforce a rule that doesn't exist, based on a fraudulent interpretation of a legal document." 015, 014. He clicked to his final slide. It was a simple question in large. Bold letters. Is this the community we want to be? 003, 002, 001, 000. The clock flashed red. His time was up. He said nothing more, just stood at the podium as a wave of stunned silence rolled over the room, followed by an explosion of angry, overlapping voices. For a moment, there was chaos. Then, a voice cut through the noise. It was David Miller, standing tall in the middle of the room. "Point of order. Madam Chair," he boomed, his surveyor's voice accustomed to being heard over the wind. "According to our bylaws, any member can make a motion from the floor. I move that the president be suspended from her duties, effective immediately, pending a full, independent financial audit of all vendor contracts from the last 3 years." Second, shouted another homeowner. Rebecca, finally finding her voice, banged her gavel. "This is out of order. This is not on the agenda." But it was too late. The mood in the room had irrevocably shifted. The other board members, seeing their own political survival on the line, began conferring in hushed, urgent tones. The community had seen the truth, laid out in a clear, 5-minute chain of evidence. The Queen had been deposed, not by a rebellion, but by a PowerPoint presentation. The board, sensing the overwhelming will of the homeowners, reluctantly agreed to vote on the motion. It passed 4-1, with Rebecca casting the loan. Defiant, nay. A second motion was immediately made to schedule a special meeting for a recall vote. It also passed. The procedural machine she had so skillfully manipulated had just been turned against her. Luke walked back to his seat, his legs feeling unsteady. Mrs. Gable reached out and squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with tears. He had done it. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't made a single personal attack. He had simply held up a mirror to the community, and they had not liked the reflection. In the ensuing weeks, the carefully constructed world of Rebecca Walsh crumbled. The independent audit revealed not only the conflict of interest contract with her brother-in-law, but a pattern of no-bid contracts and questionable expenditures disguised as emergency maintenance. The special meeting for the recall vote became a formality. Rebecca resigned from the board the day before, issuing a terse statement about pursuing new opportunities. A new board was elected, comprised of homeowners who, like Luke, had been drawn into community politics against their will. David Miller was unanimously elected president. Luke, to his own surprise, reluctantly agreed to chair the Architectural Control Committee, with the sole purpose of rewriting the rules to be clear, fair, and almost impossible to abuse. They established a simple, transparent appeals process and reduced the fine schedule to a level meant to encourage compliance, not generate revenue. Mrs. Gable's wind chimes were officially granted a permanent exemption for historical and sentimental value. Life at the Cove slowly returned to the peaceful rhythm Luke had come searching for. The mornings were quiet again, broken only by the lapping of the water and the distant cry of the loons. One rainy Saturday afternoon, Luke decided to finally, properly clean out his father's old desk. He emptied the drawers, sorting through decades of receipts, old fishing licenses, and dried-up pens. In the very back of the bottom drawer, tucked inside a faded manila folder he'd overlooked before, he found a small stack of correspondence. It was a formal proposal, dated 20 years earlier, from a local development company. The letter outlined a plan to petition the county to rezone a large swath of the Serenity Cove waterfront, including his father's property for commercial use. They wanted to build a marina, a boat rental facility, and a small restaurant. The lead petitioner on the proposal was a name Luke now knew well: Rebecca's father. Beneath the proposal was a copy of a letter his own father had written in response, not to the developer, but to Rebecca herself, who was listed as a partner in her family's company. It was polite, eloquent, and unyielding. Dear Ms. Walsh, his father had written, I have reviewed your family's proposal. While I appreciate the potential economic benefits, I must respectfully decline to support any action that would sacrifice the quiet, residential character of this cove. This is a place for families, for nature, and for peace. It is not, and should never be, a place for commerce. I will be organizing my neighbors to formally oppose this rezoning petition at the county level. Luke sat back in his chair, the letter resting in his hands. It all made sense now. The obsession with his specific piece of land, the relentless, personal nature of the attacks. It had never been about a toolbox or property values. It was a decades-old grudge. His father had been the one who had stood in the way of her family's ambitions, who had publicly thwarted a plan that would have made them rich, and for 20 years. Rebecca had waited, accumulating power within the small kingdom of the HOA, until the son of the man who had defeated her arrived, vulnerable and alone, giving her the chance to finally win the war she felt her family had lost. He looked out the window at the placid, gray surface of the lake. His father had fought to protect this place from a marina. Luke had fought to protect it from a tyrant. The legacy wasn't just the cabin, It was the fight itself. The quiet, stubborn refusal to let someone else's greed or hunger for power destroy something beautiful. He placed the letter back in the folder, closed the drawer, and felt, for the first time in a very long time, a deep and profound sense of peace. The end.